We'll see if this setup works. I'm trying something new. I kind of want to be embedded within the game, and this is how to do it, I guess. The last video was a long one, so we're going to keep this shorter and hopefully more punchy and atmospheric. Also, no major spoilers this time. I'm excited to talk about Animal Well. It's a shining example of the game industry operating exactly as it should. I know about Animal Well only because of a prolific gaming YouTuber named Jason Gastro, known better as Video Game Donkey. You might know him as well. He's pretty famous. He's a longtime hypercritical voice in the industry, reliably tearing into juggernaut companies like Ubisoft for their unfinished games, cash grabs, and general malpractice. He also has a prodigious knack for breaking any game he touches and can utterly expose poorly optimized experiences.
Grandpa, no, you're supposed to be dead. Now go in the water. You are dead.
And in an industry that reaps huge profits while decimating their passionate workforce every other fiscal quarter, he's cemented himself as a vital watchdog. As unserious and satirical as his work can be, in creating his publishing company Big Mode, he's clearly developed and executed an earnest dogma towards best practice within the industry. Cutting through the satire in Jason's multi-video promotion of his debut title reveals an undeniable respect and admiration for the project and its sole developer, Billy Basso. I'd wager that his position as a critic and outsider has primed him well to take this venture on as a thoughtful, ethical endeavor. It's clear that he cares deeply about the medium, most publicly by offering his services as a collaborator, contributing to the project's success with playtesting, as he and his wife are credited for this. Of course, I don't know the exact relationship dynamic, and I promise to voice criticism if information contrary to my current take arises. With that said, Big Mode seemingly jumped in seamlessly halfway through the game's 5-year production, providing Basso ample time, space, and resources to execute his vision on his terms. No crunch, no layoffs, no nonsense, just unconditional creative support for the sake of seeing something through exactly as it was envisioned. I'm sure it was a huge risk for Basso to put his trust in a first-time publisher, but that bravery has seemed to pay off for both parties. I can't think of a better incentive to support this project and the ones that follow from Big Mode. What is Animal Well? Well, it's a Metroidvania. If you aren't familiar with the term, it's a genre that derives its name from two other game series which share similar mechanics, Metroid and Castlevania. The term was coined in the late 90s when both series had successive releases. Games of this genre share core mechanics, focusing heavily on platforming and exploration with a character that improves their traversal capabilities through items or abilities which they earn throughout their adventure. The map is generally a staple of the genre, since the player will often encounter temporary dead ends, screw around a little in vain, pursue another direction, and then find an item that awards them a precious light bulb moment. What once was an obstacle becomes a way forward. This design offers a nice sweet spot in between completely linear experiences and open world experiences. Under that definition, Animal Well is a textbook Metroidvania. It does, however, lack the traditional, often trying combat that many of its colleagues incorporate as a core mechanic. That's not to say it's devoid of challenge. Animal Well sits in an interesting space, presenting as low stakes and experientially driven, but also demanding skill from the player in concentrated pockets, whether it be puzzle solving, platforming, or navigation. Is it good? Yes, very. Two words stuck in my mind the entire time I played: atmosphere and innovation. The world of Animal Well is gloriously opaque, completely dialogue-free, and extremely well executed. As a testament to its vague premise, I didn't have a clue what my main objective was until clocking 3 or 4 hours. I'm a jumping blob with enough dexterity to pull levers and throw a frisbee, for God's sake. How am I supposed to crack into that lore? Shortly after rolling credits, I was presented with a host of new mystifying offerings that hinted towards many additional hours of investigation. To call it vague is not to call it unintentional, to be clear. While I don't have any real understanding of what it's about, the game seems to be saving much of its explicit lore for those who give it dozens more hours of attention. The art direction, especially the carefully chosen color palettes and intricate artwork for each corner of the world, evoke such a profound mystique. What an utter triumph this is from Basso, considering the artistic trade-offs that must be made when drawing and animating with limited pixels at his disposal. I mean, look at the starfish crawling along in the background of this scene. Billy Blob Game keeps us in it, for sure. The map is good, considering the previously mentioned constraints, made better through color coding and made worse by the lack of detail which is a consequence of the game's pixel art medium. It can definitely be a challenge making a mental map between the vague shape presented on the map and the room it's meant to represent. The UI is refreshingly minimal and isolated to the very bottom of the screen when you're not pulling up your inventory, which in itself is a rarity due to the active item cycling that's possible with the controller's bumpers. These choices give the game itself ample breathing room. The sound design works perfectly for the art style, and the subtle injection of music provokes a patchwork of somberness, loneliness, and contemplativeness. I found myself wishing to hear it more, as much of my playthrough happened without music playing. As the title suggests, the well is littered with animals of all kinds who don't speak but communicate in their own way through their thoughtfully crafted mannerisms, providing hints as to how you're supposed to interact with them. Animal Well's experience design is embedded fluidly within the creatures in the levels without unnecessary scaffolding, save for the occasional button hint. Some animals are more plentiful per species than others, as they belong to specific themed sections of the well, while others are one-offs that amaze with their stunning or chaotic cameo appearances. I loved when I entered a new frame and caught sight of an animal and froze, sizing them up the best I could to discern whether I had locked eyes with friend or foe. It reminded me of moments when I've spotted deer on a hike and stood rooted in place, doing my best to maintain our peaceful coexistence. And to my earlier mention of innovation, I'm blown away by the unconventional item selection in Animal Well. Outwardly mundane but unorthodox item choices have created unprecedented mechanics which allow for atypical level design and novel, clever puzzle making. I felt pleasantly disarmed approaching new rooms and lacking the immediate traditional gamer intuition which generally helps me problem solve. The ways that this game breaks convention make it difficult to apply years of habitual knowledge to the problems it presents. In turn, my small successes throughout my journey felt really good. The game is small, I rolled credits in under 9 hours, and easily traversable, which made me feel totally comfortable taking my time with exploration and having no issue abruptly, sometimes prematurely, heading in a new direction to try my luck elsewhere. It does eventually provide shortcuts to better navigate the well, but I didn't use them much, nor was I wishing for a fast travel option. Due to the foreign nature of the obstacles I faced, I found that I had a tendency to overcomplicate my solution attempts. I did, in time, develop a fluency for Animal Well's challenges over the course of its runtime, and started to get a strong sense of what the game was asking me to do the moment I stepped into a room, knowing also when to scan a few rooms in quick succession to see if a puzzle extended across all of them. As I became more familiar with its design language, I did appreciate earning a command over the game in the latter quarter. Despite that, I felt that there was often a large gap between the moment I understood what a puzzle was asking of me and the moment I successfully executed the solution. This can happen in part due to extremely tight platforming windows that ended up becoming frustrating for me. I'd argue that the knowledge of solving a puzzle should be prioritized over the platforming skill that it takes to execute that puzzle, especially when it's pre-solved in your head, and I'd suggest widening the skill requirement with more lenient platforming windows in those particular instances. There are moments where platforming is the priority of a particular challenge, and in those situations, I'm happy to be more precise with the sequence of difficult platforming actions. However, sometimes traversal requires you to platform in between rooms, which I found jarring due to the abrupt room transitions that sometimes happen. This bubble section in particular was kicking my butt, and I felt annoyed that I had to guess my jump distance without seeing where I was headed. It doesn't help that your character has very little health, and platforming failure can easily result in death, sending you back to a save spot which can be rooms away from where you were. There was a particular instance where I was trying out various solutions to a multi-room puzzle that kept killing me, so I ended up walking right to left across the same 4 rooms over a dozen times, growing more impatient with that long walk each time I made it. This can become frustrating when you die after accomplishing a major element to a puzzle which opens a door, for example, and then die on the next stage of the puzzle, which forces you to start the whole sequence over. As a rule, this is the kind of genre where I do not want to be redoing tasks I just successfully completed. In this game's odd treatment of respawn locations and save states conveys an inconsistent understanding of how progress is measured while requiring much more backtracking for the reckless player. My frustrations with Animal Well have been articulated perfectly by Janet Garcia in the Min-Max podcast.
Where like this is a great game that like sent me into a rage spiral.
Oh,
because I
interesting.
do think some of the design choices are a little bit grating. It is a lot of, do you want to retry this puzzle many times, which is cool because that's like the design of the game. But then they're like, do you want to have to cut across 3 different rooms to do so? I'm like, not really. It's a lot of like really petty checkpointing that never really felt like it justified itself through the types of puzzles that it had. Like
This
I was
is
waiting
interesting.
for it that that design choice to make sense. And that moment never happened for me.
And because I'm not losing anything other than the tiniest bit of progress upon death, I was playing fast and loose out there and dying all the time. Thankfully, falling into water doesn't cause damage, otherwise I may have struggled to maintain my resolve. Another Metroidvania I just played, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, awards you a great deal of health and is usually generous with mid-platforming checkpoints, so that you have a number of attempts to be successful and only have to completely bail out on a platforming challenge if you're unsuccessful dozens of times. Prince of Persia is the longer game and much larger in scale, so it's sensible that it discouraged redos more than Animal Well, but I still find myself longing for a bit more forgiveness. Speaking of which, Animal Well has moments which wildly ramp up difficulty throughout, and due to its non-linearity, it doesn't always seem as though its difficulty is building as you progress, and instead scatters difficult pockets within the major activity skill sets that seemingly come out of nowhere. I anticipate some of these moments would crush a more casual player, and without spoilers, I'll just say that the last mandatory thing you have to do in the dog domain baffled me when I realized it was what the game was asking from me. It just felt so incongruous to the rest of Animal Well's challenges. I must admit, the tedious loop of failure and backtracking, because of how extraneous it felt in contribution to the game's more intentional trials, became, in the back half, a defining detractor from my love for this game's triumphs. Nevertheless, Animal Well is polished, it's gorgeous, it's thematically breathtaking, it made me feel curious and cautious and clever, and it was made by a singular man who surely had more pressing considerations than those in his future player base content to relentlessly huck themselves into spike pits. Billy Basso created an engine from scratch, then did all of the artwork, animations, coding logic, item behavior, level design, user interface, sound effects, music, multi-platform optimization, and surely more. The credits outside of him include only playtesters, localizers, and special thanks. He crafted a profound, captivating, novel, complete experience in 5 years with adequate backing from his publisher. Could you imagine how much more saturated with masterpieces this industry could be if creators were equitably supported? Let's hope we get there. I'd recommend voting with your wallet in support of that kind of future and giving Animal Well your time. From where I'm standing, it's well worth it.